Crypto in chat. I am Seymour Mack. This is my partner in crime.
And Moses Flows.
It's Moses Flows. You want to give him full screen Moses? Full screen Moses in
Hi,
the
everybody.
house. Full
I
screen.
want to thank you for. Oh,
Sorry.
I want to thank you for joining us here on a very special Crypto in Chat. Corrected Axiom. You know, a lot of people been referring to us as just Corrected Axiom, which is fine. Crypto in Chat could be the, the insider nickname. Corrected Axiom works. You know, we have a crazy show today.
Thank you, Stacy, for giving the technicals early in the cast, man. Thank you. Voice
Stacey
good,
on
video
top of
good.
shit, as
Everything's
always.
looking good. We are very excited to be joining you today and having you join us here on Crypto in Chat. We have a very special guest coming up. We're about to Skype him in. We're going to have about a 30-minute conversation. We'll see if we can bleed him over into a little overtime without ruining his Friday night. But we will have Jim Cantrell of Vector Space Systems on. So you know what? Let's just get right to it, and let's get him on. We're gonna Skype him in here live.
We're going live.
We're going live.
Live.
Fuck it, we're going live.
Shout out to Jamie Smith who's
Shout out to
watching.
Nate as well.
Hey, Jim, how you doing?
Jim.
Good.
How's it going there? What are you in the garage?
Yeah, it's my favorite place to be.
I hear you, man. I spent a lot of time in my own garage. How you doing today on this beautiful Friday?
Good, good. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. I know you don't have a lot of time, so we're gonna try to just not waste too much time with the sweet and plenties here. We met you. We had a chance to actually hear you speak in Aspen at the Nexus conference, and we got to hear your stories about your early days with starting SpaceX with Elon Musk, some of the stories about trying to purchase rockets, and it was a fabulous opportunity for us, and we're happy to have you on. So thank you for joining us. Let's bring Moses in here.
Hey.
There he is. Lots of big news with Vector. Lots of huge news with Vector, I should say. Let's start out, if you don't mind, jumping right into business here, if that's okay with you.
Good.
All right. Let's talk about the National Space Council meeting. Vice President Pence, you got a chance to meet him. How was that?
Yeah, he was nicer than I thought he'd be. It was, I measure success in my life by how far away from the White House I end up being. But in this case, when the vice president invites you, you go. And so, yeah, it was good. He seems to have a sincere interest in space, and he seems to have a sincere interest in commercial space, which I'm all in for.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of big news coming out of the administration about deregulation as far as space goes. What can you tell us about what was talked about on that topic?
Yeah, so it was the topic of conversation, and I set this in kind of a bigger context. Really, what's happening is we've got a major change in the way space is being conducted from the way it was over the last 50 years. Really, the so-called military-industrial complex came from World War II, and it was a government-private partnership in defense of the nation. And really, the space program was nothing more than something that it extended the Cold War into space. So space was the domain of nation states, and now what we're seeing is commercial companies are not only sending their own satellites out, but they're sending people out, and so the whole entire Space Council meeting was all about how do we, as a government, deal with this burgeoning change in space from once government domination to really the government's kind of a trailing force. And it's a reactive policy. It's not a proactive policy. So in the old days of the Space Council, they were trying to think of, how do we reinvigorate the space program. Here they're trying to figure out how they catch up with the commercial actors. And, it was a little bit like having an argument in front of your family and, on national TV is what I watched. But, the vice president did a good job in, talking about what the big issues were and doling out action items and so on. So it was largely a ceremonial kind of thing. But some symbology sometimes does make a difference.
Do you feel like this is like a second space race just amongst the private sector now, and that this government actually will, I don't know, let it happen?
Yeah, that's the hope. So far the government's not really gotten in the way, but they always can get in the way. And for example, when Moon Express, I was part of that group. When they went ahead and filed to put a private lander on the moon, the U.S. government said, "Well, we have no regulation authority for that," and they felt like they ought to have. And so their whole goal was to figure out how they stay out of that. And so really what we've got here is the government's basic intention and reaction is to regulate things as they come out, but they don't always have a real good basis for that regulation. And so I think they're really struggling with two things. One, do we need to regulate this industry? And if so, how do we do it in such a way that we don't kill off our economic growth? Because space is the one thing that America's really great at. We really, truly lead the world in space. We don't lead them anymore in cars. We don't lead them anymore in steel production, but space, we got it. So they don't want to kill that.
Speaking of, with SpaceX just having its successful launch, what you used to work or helped found SpaceX, actually. Can you give us any of those awesome stories you threw out at the Nexus conference, if you could? Just your favorite one, just about Elon Musk and yourself founding SpaceX.
Yeah, so Elon called me out of the blue back in 2001. It was a nice Friday afternoon in northern Utah where I lived, and I was headed home, had the top down on the car, and the phone rings, and it's this funny accented guy, and it was a 6'5" area code, so I knew it was from Palo Alto, and didn't quite know who this guy was. He said his name, I thought it was Ian Musk, and he said he was a internet millionaire and wanted to put his money towards showing that humanity could become a multiplanetary species. That's what he said. So he's talking so fast. I said, look, I'm going to go home and I'll call you from home because I can't hear you. So I go home and I, said hi to the kids, went into my office, and I called the number back, and it was my old Motorola StarTAC phone. So at least we had a record of the calls right back then. And I called it back, and it was a fax machine. And I thought, right, the guy that made all this money and uses the fax machine for a phone, sure. And so I kind of went and had a beer, and then the phone rang again, and it was this guy, and he's agitated. And Elon's really pissed off, and he's like, "How come you didn't call me back?" And I said, "I did, and I got your fax number." He's like, "Oh, okay." So he started telling me some more about this, and he wanted to send mice to Mars, and there was all these things he wanted to do that seemed kind of crazy, but he had this idea, he had this vision, right? And as an immigrant, right? So if you want to talk about immigration and an argument for keeping immigrants coming into this country, he's your number one argument. And that was one of the things that surprised me about the Pence discussion, was he's talking about immigration on the one hand, then he's lauding this great American achievement done by an immigrant. So not to derail the story here. So coming back to the story, Elon and he wanted to come see me at my house, and I'm like, no. He's just like, "Do you have an airport nearby?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's nearby, but I don't even know who this guy is, and he wants to come to my house." And I'm kind of paranoid. I spent 6 years in Russia, so they developed my full paranoia, and so I said, "Look," I lied. I said, "Look, I got to fly out of commercial out of Salt Lake City, so why don't you meet me behind security? I'll go in early." And so he flew in. I figured he couldn't pack a gun. There were cops there, and we met in the Delta Crown Room back then. And that's when he told me his whole intention to do this, and he needed Russian rockets, and that's why he called me. So we went over to Russia. Go ahead.
At that point, at that phone call, what were you doing with your life at that point?
Well, so I had got back from my 6 years in Russia and started doing sales for this little small space laboratory in northern Utah. And so I was doing a lot of that. I was doing a lot of consulting. I'd worked with the Planetary Society, which was an organization founded by Carl Sagan and Lou Friedman. They were space advocates. We built the first solar sail called Cosmos One. We did that with private money. We went to the Arts and Entertainment Network, which is still around, and they gave us $4.5 million, and then we're going to make a documentary out of it. So we flew 2 spacecraft out of Russian submarines, if you can believe it or not.
Wow.
In the late 80s, yeah. So we actually got to go out on one of the submarines out of Murmansk, and it's unthinkable today. But we literally took the warheads off of the missiles, and put the spacecraft in there. So I've been doing some things like that, and I was really kind of just drifting in life, honestly, at the time that Elon called, and was consulting a little bit here and there, and so I looked at it as a good opportunity to make some money. I had a Maserati I wanted to buy, so
Sure.
maybe I could make some money off this.
So he comes to meet you, and you have that conversation. What happens from there?
Yeah, so we met in Salt Lake City, and a guy named Bob Zubrin, who started the Mars Society, came with, and Bob had early on talked to him, and so we talked about what kind of mission might make sense and what kind of rockets might make sense, and basically what came out of that was a plan to design a mission so that we knew what size rocket he needed. And first person I called was John Garvey, who's one of Vector's founders. And I said, Garvey, he'd help me with the Cosmos One and other Russian antics. He'd been building Delta rockets for Boeing years ago, and he'd left like me and just kind of drifting around, not doing things with corporate America anymore. And so John and I put together a plan. We got a group of people together. Elon kept shoveling money at it, and we designed a Mars lander for him that would grow a plant on the surface of Mars. And so what came of that was a plan to go procure some launchers from Russia. So Elon and a guy named Mike Griffin, who later became the NASA administrator, and I headed over to Russia in November of 2001 to buy a couple launch vehicles for the effort. And Elon was willing to do it right then and there. And when we arrived in Russia, there were two groups we wanted to see that we had identified, and these are groups I'd worked with before. One was called Machina Stroya, and they had something called the Strela launch vehicle. It was a converted ICBM. It used to carry a single 50 megaton warhead designed to kill our cities, and then they converted it to satellite launchers. So this one was big enough you could actually send something to Mars. So we went in and made an appointment with these guys and talked to them, and it was this place where you drive up and it looks like a big concrete palace, out of a Batman movie or something. And it's always snowing in Russia. And we show up, and the gates open for us. We get through the gates. And then there's this big door into the building that must have 10 padlocks on it. And we ring the doorbell. 10 minutes later, somebody comes out. They're dressed in a coat and a hat, coming from the inside, because it's cold inside as it is outside. They open all the padlocks on the door. We walk in. It's like an insane asylum, because as you walk down the aisle of the building, you see all these padded doors, which in Russia means there's important people with a padded door. And we met with their chief designer, which it's a little different in Russia than it is here. The chief designer is usually an engineer, but he's the guy that really kind of runs the organization in the old Soviet system. And we briefed him and his guys about what we're doing. Elon gave him a speech about making humanity a multiplanetary species. And this man who designed weapons to kill all of us, wasn't really amused by the whole discussion.
Wow.
And he became kind of angry. He started spitting on us. And first he spit on Elon's shoes, and then he spit on my pants. And Elon turned to me and he goes, did he just spit on me? And I said, he did. I said, it's a sign of disrespect.
Yeah, this is not good. This is not a good sign, Elon.
So we left that meeting, and we headed back to the hotel. And then the next meeting we had was they were a little more, shall we say, cultured and puppy trained, I guess. And these guys, because the old Soviets weren't business people, and they were thrust into this market economics of capitalism. They didn't quite understand how to sell things. So it was always interesting to see. But these guys had been schooled by Morton Thiokol, who's now ATK. And they were partnered with him on demilitarizing some of these ICBMs because they were filled with these toxic fuels. And when they got treated out by the SALT Treaty and the START treaties, the Russians would just dump the fuel on the ground and let it contaminate everything. So the American government paid for our guys to go over there and help do it in a way that didn't contaminate all the groundwater. And so they had been exposed to this, and they knew how to do Western business. So they politely listened to us, served us coffee and tea, and Elon gave his speech, the multiplanetary species. And it was funny, at the end of this, we told him, Elon says, we'd like to buy 2 launch vehicles, and we're willing to offer $2 million apiece. And we knew that they'd been selling them for $2 million apiece to the English. And which is cheap for a rocket. I mean, it's just really, really cheap, especially one this size. And there was just this uncomfortable silence. And finally, one of the Russians says, "No, they're $8 million apiece." And Elon said, "Hey, I'm not going to pay that. We know that you sold them for $2 million." And then finally, there was this guy who was in the corner. I called him the blue-eyed colonel, and he said nothing, right? And in fairly good English, he said, he called him a little boy. He says, "Listen, little boy." He says, "We do not sell rockets to people who are not serious. You're not serious people." And so he says, "Take your internet money and go home, please." So the future head of NASA, Elon Musk, the future guy that's going to kill the rocket industry, and I walked out of that little building into the cold Moscow afternoon, and we had a plane to catch at about 2:00. So we got in the taxi. The taxi was kind of quiet on the way out, and Elon didn't say much. And Mike and I, of course, we both had security clearances, and we're just happy to get the hell out of there.
Right.
And so we got to the airport. We got on the plane, and every time you take off from Moscow on like a Delta plane, this was Delta Flight 31 back to New York, you feel like you're in sovereign territory, right? So a drink is called for when you lift off, and we ordered up whiskey, and Mike and I are sitting in the back and having a good time. And Mike Griffin's a little bit of a potty mouth, and I'm guessing this is not a PG show here, so I can tell you what he's.
We were cursing before you came on.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So Mike's watching Elon, and Elon's up in front of us. He's tapping on the computer madly. He doesn't drink, and he's just tapping away at the computer, and he's sort of socially awkward. And Mike elbows me, and he's the son of an army colonel, and he says, "What the fuck do you think that idiot Savan is up to?" Loud enough for Elon to hear. And I said, "I don't know." I said, "Mike has probably Plan 9 to save the world, right? He's got at least a dozen of those." And Elon turns around and he goes, "Oh, fuck yourselves." He says, "I think we can make this rocket ourselves." And Mike looked at me and he goes, "Elon's going to make this rocket himself. Well, that's a new idea. Nobody's ever decided to do that." And I said, "Yeah, I said, there's a long graveyard of bodies out in front of you. A lot of people have tried and failed at doing this. There was a guy named Andrew Beal who was a banker out of Texas that tried it back 20 years earlier and it had failed. He spent $100 million of his own money and finally gave up. And so Elon says, he says, "But I've got a spreadsheet." And I said to Mike, I said, "Well, that's a difference. He's got a spreadsheet. This will obviously work." And Elon, he's like, "Oh, well, go fuck yourselves." He says, "Have a look at this." So he hands his computer back, and Mike and I start looking at the spreadsheet, and Elon's like, "Well, hey, what do you think?" And Mike and I are looking at it, thinking, "Hey, this is actually quite good, And so I said, "Who did this?" He goes, "Oh," he says, "a couple of these guys, John Garvey and Eric Vesnar, they did this for me." And so it turned out, so John and Eric, unbeknownst to me, were building rockets in their garage instead of, that's why I'm here in the garage, because everything starts in the garage.
Yeah.
And instead of building race cars like I do, he's building liquid rockets, right? So his wife's car's out on the curb, on the liquid rocket called Kimbo's on the inside. So Elon came and saw this, and he was so inspired by what he saw, these guys, like Robert Goddard, making this shit in their garage. And one of their friends, Tom Mueller, who later became SpaceX's propulsion guy, he's a hayseed from Idaho, and a good guy with his hands and smart guy engineer. And he built a 10,000-pound liquid rocket engine in his own garage with his lathe and milling machine. And so they convinced Elon he could build a rocket himself. So that's what started SpaceX. So
wow.
After I gave the spreadsheet back, Mike and I just said, "Hey, yeah, we could do this." He says, "Well, we're going to start a company to go build these things." So SpaceX was never started to make money. It was started to build a rocket to go to Mars. And that's the thing that I've told people for 15 years. And now they don't threaten to throw me in an insane asylum anymore. But when I say the only reason that we're doing this at SpaceX is to go to Mars and send people to Mars, and he doesn't really care about the commerce of it. That's only to pay for it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just you got to recognize the guy's going to make bigger and bigger rockets all the time.
Yeah, he's
like
idealistic. which is awesome. It's amazing,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, I mean, bravo to the guy. I mean, those guys, it's not just Elon. It's this whole cadre of people. Elon sets the vision, and everybody follows it. But you got 5,000 people that made that happen.
Jim, to your vision, then you wind up leaving SpaceX to form Vector, and basically, what I gather, or how I try to explain Vector to people, I think I quoted you as to saying. You want to be the McDonald's of the rocket industry, whereas easily accessible or on every corner. Is that right, or am I butchering that? How was it?
That's good enough. But the way I'd say it is, Elon and Jeff Bezos want to send humans into orbit. When you have such big rockets, really, it only makes sense economically to send humans up. But there's not many satellites that size to launch. So what we want to do is we want to consumerize space in the sense that we want to make space more accessible for not only the entrepreneurs, but eventually for the consumers. Our ultimate vision is to create a ecosystem between a rocket and a satellite constellation called Galactic Sky that you can program an app for. So you can program an app right now for an iPhone, put it out on the iPhone store, and people can buy the app. We want to do the same thing in space where you can have an app that uses space assets to do whatever it is you want to do. I mean, if it's a business, great. If you want to have a orbital peep show, great. Whatever you fancy. It's something that is consumer oriented and can appeal to a wider variety of people. The reality is there's not that many of us out there that know how to build spacecraft, and it's a small group of people, and it always really probably will be a small group of people. So what we have to do is what Steve Jobs did for the computer industry, is to put these tools in the hands of innovative folks like yourself or anybody else who has bright ideas. I'm not smart enough to know what you can do in space and all the apps are, but the whole of humanity is smart enough to figure that out. It's up to us to give them the tools to go do it, and that's really what we're about.
You're opening that plant you signed for 25 years. You're going to be hiring and staffing for that. I'm just asking whether or not I hope you will accept my resume if I email that to you. I'd love to work for Vector in some fashion.
Anybody that wants to work, send your resume, and we're hiring. We're up to about 100 people already, and we've got about 400 or 500 more to go before we probably we'll stop. But yeah, we're going to be 200, I think, by the end of the year here.
Awesome. And you also have in the news right now that you have inked a deal for 5 orbital launches. I believe it was with the UK. Is that right? Or what's the deal with these?
Yeah. Group called Open Cosmos in the UK, and their business model is they build the satellites and they have pre-ordered launches, and that they're looking for payloads. So it's kind of like our Galactic Sky concept, but they're looking for people that have a camera or whatever it is that they want to fly up there, and they take care of the rest.
Wow, that's awesome.
How much of that market do you think are flat earthers trying to prove that the world is not a sphere?
I think they're afraid of knowing what the real answer is. They're not coming around much.
Yeah. I love that Elon quote about his live feed. He said it looks so fake it has to be real.
Right. Yeah, the Tesla in orbit, it brought tears to my eyes. Going back to the Maserati, by the way, sort of a little anecdotal story. When I got my first $10,000 from Elon, I blew it on a burned out Maserati Ghibli, and I have strange dreams, and everybody, and they're like, "What are you going to do with that Maserati?" I said, "Well, look, the worst case is it's a test payload for our first rocket," and so that was always Elon's joke: is we're going to go around launching burned out Maseratis. So I know.
Wow, that's great. That's awesome.
The thought that provoked the Tesla. So when I saw that happen, it brought a tear to my eyes.
Hey, Jim, over your shoulder there, is that a painting of you behind the wheel?
It's actually a photograph of me behind the wheel of a Shelby Can-Am, yeah.
Ah, that's great. Now, we don't have much time with you. I know you have to skate out. But if we could talk a little bit about the relationship between Nexus and Vector and what's coming up this year.
Sure. Yeah, so we inked a deal with Nexus to hosts their cryptocurrency on our Galactic Sky constellation. We're starting to put up what we call our Block Zero satellites. We'll be doing that, I think, the first one this year. And Nexus is also putting up their own satellite. So think of Galactic Sky as being sort of the backbone of the internet in space. And you have computing nodes, much like servers in space. And so same as the network of Nexus on the ground, uses servers all over the world. They'll extend that into space. And we're also looking at tokenization of our system based on Nexus technology that allow users access to the network by virtue of having possession of these tokens. So that will be, I think, something that will allow everybody from the back roads of Africa to the front roads of the United States to have access to stuff like this.
Absolutely. And it's our understanding that you said that you would accept payment for some of these launches in Nexus. Can you confirm that you have clients that are willing to pay in Nexus or have committed to pay in Nexus?
We have at least one client that's paying me in Nexus, yeah.
Excellent. Fantastic news. The chat is going wild, just so you know. We have another question from the chat, actually, from Stacy. He says, will you ever make Vector an IPO?
Yeah, actually, that's our plan.
Boom! Thank you, Stacy, for that one.
Beautiful.
I didn't
So
remember.
we've been telling people if you want to invest in Vector, you invest by investing in Nexus right now until it becomes publicly traded. So that's excellent news. Thank you for sharing that.
Very excited. Not to mention that I'm also going to be sending my resume, which he said would be okay.
Hey, send your resume, man.
I will
Anybody
relocate.
that's passionate about it and has some amount of talent, we always got a place for you.
I think you wouldn't be the type to value an indoctrination certificate from one of these universities. Speaking of, you are a self-professed libertarian. Is that correct? Is that okay to say?
I guess you could say self-protest. Professed, yeah.
Professed, yeah.
How long have you been a libertarian?
Pretty much all my life, but I didn't realize it until 10 years ago. I started becoming a card-carrying member about 10 years ago.
Was it Dr. Paul?
No, it was George Bush that pushed me into libertarianism.
Yeah.
I woke up about 8 or 9 years ago. So I had to start all over in life about 11 years ago, and part of that transformation was sort of thinking about who you really are. And I was making my living, as I call it, sucking off the tit of the government, and I realized what a corrupt part of our society it was, and I was promoting war and promulgating the war. And I know that you're talking to a guy who used to vote for Reagan and the Republicans pretty regularly. As I watched the wars killing the best of our country, it's our children, and dropping trillions of dollars of our wealth into this hole, I began to rethink about what I wanted anything to do with any of the government business. So I left. I had a very successful consulting firm that I closed down. I didn't want anything to do more with the government. And that's when I became a lot more activist in the Libertarian Party. And as I've watched, the Obama administration, I think, was sort of the second cementing of my dedication to the cause of liberty, because contrary to what you think a Democrat of being a defender of civil liberties, they actually became the greatest offender of liberties. I thought the Patriot Act was bad until I saw what the Obama administration did with it. And we're watching that, whether or not you like Trump or not, this whole business of the FBI and what they've done to our system and used the spying against us, all of us. It's shameful.
Also, I mean, this second Red Scare, I mean, it's pretty absurd. Yeah. I mean, we talk about it frequently. I mean, we always wind up going into. I mean, it's so frustrating. I mean, even right now as we speak, there's people pursuing a Russian collusion narrative, which makes no sense, especially being as enlightened as we are to understand that a man named Seth Rich had actually released, because he was a Bernie Sanders supporter, and released that information and then died mysteriously. You know what I mean? I mean, sure. It was, for me, it was understanding that the left and the right paradigm, the Democrats and Republicans are literally the same exact thing. They're working together for the same goals. Yeah. Have you looked into the how much do you know about cryptocurrency? I mean, apart from obviously your son, and the libertarian undertones and against the Federal Reserve or things of that nature.
I've been a long time student of the what I call the gold standard in our currency, and that having been gone and understanding the debt and the long term concern about our debt. So no, I totally get the cryptocurrency cause. I'm hugely supportive of it. I'm mostly hugely supportive of it because it takes that whole ability to deflate our currency out of the hands of a centralized government. So the problem with it being market based is it's so, as we know very well the last few months, it's so volatile that it's really hard to be a reliable currency at this point. So my view is that Bitcoin is going to become effectively the gold reserve behind the altcoins. That some altcoins will become transactional in nature and stable, and those will be the ones that become very valuable.
Sure. Where do you see Nexus going? Get a figure.
Yeah. So, well, I'm not going to predict where it's going to go. I put a few dollars in it years ago, and it turned into more than I ever thought it would. So I know enough to know not to predict that stuff. It's so crazy. But I think despite the fact that my son's involved with it, it's a good group of people, and I'm really pleased with the business people that have surrounded him, and that's exactly what he needed. He's a smart kid, and he's now surrounded by some really, really good business folks that are both very ethical but very smart and good at making this into a workable system. So I'm pretty optimistic about Nexus being a long-term potential for that stable currency. It may end up having other uses. We're not smart enough to know where these things go. Yeah. So Nexus may become transactional in the sense of tokens for satellite networks or something of that nature. That comes out of this sort of collaboration. It's really hard to know where the market's going to land out, but Nexus is going to play a big part of it, I think, because of its ability to scale.
And that's simple. I love Colin's vision. Because it's all about it's us, as he said. My favorite picture, apart from me tearing up standing next to Ron Paul, but my other favorite picture from the conference is Colin holding up the U and the S from the Nexus on the stage, right. And as he said over and over, Nexus is us. And it's a connection of great, like-minded people. And it's amazing.
Yeah. I can tell you, having known him from the time he was a little kid, he always was very generous, and he always was overly generous, I always thought. But I'm starting to see where that's led him, and it's a good place.
As a father, did you see this coming? Did you think that this is what he would end up doing with his life? I meant to ask him when we had him on 2 weeks ago if he felt pressure, like having a father who was actually like a rocket scientist. I've never felt that pressure before. My father's an electrician who I love very much and I'm very proud of, but the pressures may be a little bit different. I meant to ask him, but we didn't get to it. Did you see him taking this route in life, or what'd you think would end up?
I didn't. I've always just wished for my kids that they find something they're passionate about. So when he was a young child, I was always trying to search with him to help him find those things he was passionate about and to enable him to do those things. And it turned out he was passionate about computers. From the time he was so little, he could use one. And as we watched him grow into that, he started programming games and doing some pretty amazing stuff with computers. I'm no fool with computers either, and he far surpassed me by the time he was 10 years old. And then he disappeared into his hippy-dippy stage at about age 18 and went off into Bisbee doing whatever he did down there and ended up, that's the time when he invented Nexus. And he was walking around Arizona in the bare feet in the summer, looking like he belonged with the homeless, and for a while I thought this kid's really, up to nothing here, and I'm going to end up having to support him. And then when Nexus hit, he suddenly grew up like 10 years in about 12 months. So it's been a real pleasure to watch. I'm real proud of him, and it's really a surprise for me, and it's a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, I'm gonna let the ADD take over for a second and guide us in a right turn here. in the news right now, we have on the topic of fatherhood and raising your children and trying to guide them in some sort of way. I'm a father of a 4-year-old. He'll be 4 next week. Moses is expecting his first son coming up in a few months here. We have another school shooting, another mass shooting with somebody who was obviously very troubled. There were warnings. There were attempts to kind of address this issue, and it seems that the police down there and the FBI kind of dropped the ball a couple times. What do you think is missing now in parenthood that is guiding or not guiding, a lack of guidance in these kids' lives, where we're seeing these mass shootings and we're seeing, these liberal, I don't want to say liberal, but these snowflakes who seem to have no direction but are guided strictly by emotion and not logic. What do you think is missing?
Tell me how you really feel.
What do you think is missing here from the time when you were raising Colin and your other children?
I always tried to raise my kids to have, a sense of honor, in the sense that they could be proud of themselves and what they've done. And I think that's what's really missing, if I have to say so, in the rest of the society, that it's become a more materialistic or a more power focused sort of existence. And, you can't blame a lot of these kids. They're raised by parents that seem to not give a crap about them and seem to give a crap more about, going out and having a good time, getting drunk, getting laid, whatever it is they're doing. And they leave their kids to raise themselves. Kids are just humans in training. They are not humans on their own. They have to be trained. And, I think that I'm a big fan of the Japanese samurai warrior culture. And, that sense of honor and duty that comes from being a part of humanity, I think is something that's really missing from our society. And, it was not always there completely, but it seems like it's really become unpopular. And, you're considered old-fashioned for thinking these things, but I still live by that code.
That's great. Jim, I know you said you only had a half hour. I creeped right over that half hour. We appreciate you coming on. I know you got other places to go.
Cool.
We'd love to have you on again.
We'll do it again.
That'd be great.
Excellent. We actually have Colin just tuned into the chat. He's watching the video now. Anything you want to say to Colin? Anything at all? Right now.
Hey, buddy, we're going racing this weekend, man. Come see us.
That's why we got to have you on again, because I want to talk cars. And
yes.
I want to talk racing. There's so much to talk to you about. So whenever you want to come on, we told Colin the same thing. You're welcome to be a guest host with us every week if you'd like.
Okay, sounds
free
good.
up your Fridays.
We're just going to, and we'll give you your own segment. And what you do is you tell Elon stories.
Yeah. You guys are impinging on my martini time here. So
I'm very sorry.
Sorry about that.
You could have had it with us. I mean, we're having beers.
Yeah, we're having beers. One last question. If Elon was successful tomorrow in being able to launch humans to Mars, would you take a seat on that trip?
Oh, there's no racetracks on Mars, man.
But there is a Tesla.
There will be.
It's floating around there somewhere. All right. Thanks, Jim. It was a pleasure. It was a good time. Hopefully, we'll have you on. I'll talk to you soon. All right.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Jim.
Expect my resume.
Yeah, you do.
Bye. Excellent. Thank you so much, man. That was awesome. Colin's in the house. What's going on, Colin? So, we talked about this. We weren't going to talk too much about the, like the technicals too much, because that's what everybody talks to him about.
Right.
We wanted to talk to him about the real shit, the real Jim Cantrell shit. Actually, you know what I forgot to do?
What? Man, I mean, we had a lot more that we wanted to say.
I know. I wanted to release the hashtag Papa Cantrell as he was speaking, but I actually didn't get it. I forgot to. I didn't get a chance to. Hashtag Papa Cantrell everywhere right now. If you enjoyed the conversation, we're definitely going to have him back on.
And we can go
in
into that Colin style conversation where we were talking about consciousness. I would have loved to go there with Jim. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to need more than 30 minutes for that, though.
We're going to have a group chat with that one day. We're going to set up, we're going to have 10 people on, and let's just talk about, let's get weird. Let's talk about the robot becoming conscious. I'm all about getting weird, man. Hey, listen, I don't know if anybody thinks I was ass kissing or anything. I am dead ass going to send that man my resume. And my resume sucks.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like as you were saying that, I'm like, man, you ain't never built a model rocket.
No,
I ain't never
I
seen
sure
you-
did. Are you kidding me?
Bullshit, man. I ain't never seen you build no model rocket.
I used to go down to the park in New York all the time when I was living at my dad's. That's when I used to build. I built rockets. I probably still have them. I used to build rockets and launch them and get them stuck in the trees or get them stuck on the rooftops in Queens. Swear to God. True story. But I mean, I don't think that qualifies me. There's something. I'll sweep the floors. I don't care. And I will relocate to Arizona. That's a true story.